What is a crowdfund? I had no idea. Wanted to make money in my sleep. Vegan butchers, global domain champion, a normal human being, build a crowd, borrow a crowd, or buy a crowd. I've got a product, this democratization of capital. I will tell people if it's a hobby. I'm a huge advocate of bootstrapping. I love bootstrapping.
Victoria, welcome to Between Meetings. I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Really happy to be here. Looking forward to the drive.
Crowdfunding has been on my list for quite some time, and I'm extremely excited and grateful to have the opportunity to learn from you. You have at least a couple of decades in marketing and branding in different capacities with big names like Pampers, Tide, ENMAX, TD, and even the University of Calgary.
Yes.
So what inspired the shift into the crowdfunding world, and how did you start the Crowdfunding Hub?
Yeah, so my son was in the Calgary Boys Choir. I was on the board of the Calgary Boys Choir, and I was asked, could you run this crowdfund to help us raise funds for our 40th anniversary? And I'm like, what is a crowdfund? I had no idea what it was. And so I went off, found out, ran a crowdfund, and we were able to raise enough money to make every single concert during their 40th anniversary free, so that all Calgarians could come and experience the magical music of boys' voices. And one of the things that really stopped me in my tracks was just how impactful this was. You're able to take, a large number of people, they all put a little bit of money in, and you raise a large amount of money. And I just love that impact that you could get from it. But I also realized the democratization of capital. So, I started to realize that there's two sides to this. There's not just, organizations can raise funds, but also on the other side, you've got people who have been historically blocked from entering into the crowdfunding. So, historically, you had to be an accredited investor, which is only 3% of the Canadian population. It's 12% of the US population, very telling. But 3% of the, so 97% of the population couldn't invest in early stage companies. And early stage companies is where the greatest risk is, but it's also the greatest growth. So if you think of, so many unicorns started in garages and they grew, and people were excluded from that. So that democratization of capital, it just sort of really hit me. At the same time, I've been working at the university. I was brought in to set up a company, an oil and gas service company called Gusher. And we had intentions of growing it to sell within 3 to 5 years. It took us 6 years. And at the end of that period, we sold it to Schlumberger. And my husband had handcuffs to stay on. And he was the global domain champion, very sort of impressive title. And I realized, with two little people in our lives, I needed to be around to for when he was traveling. So I had a look at what I was doing and decided, I wanted to do marketing because that's my history, but I also wanted to do crowdfunding. And it was still super early stages. This was 11 years ago, super early stages. So I started leveraging what I'd learned and just took every opportunity to learn and take every opportunity to run campaigns. And that's how it all happened. The company I set up does heavy lifting. So we do the one-to-one campaigns. We do everything for our clients. And I realized that actually there are some people who couldn't afford us. Some people don't need us because they can do marketing, but they don't know those nuances of crowdfunding. Also a bit of, wanted to make money in my sleep. So doing things online. So that's when the Crowdfunding Hub came up about 3 years ago. And that's our one-to-many product. So that's a community where people can go find out more about crowdfunding.
For founders who are new to it, or for those who don't know much about crowdfunding, if you can briefly introduce what crowdfunding is in the startup context, and what types of crowdfundings founders should know about.
Yeah, so as I said, it's a way of raising sort of a large amount of money from a large number of people, your crowd, and they each put a small amount in. That's the definition. Now, you people who've heard me before, they'll have heard my example of things like the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty was given to New York, but the plinth that it sat on was crowdfunded through the newspaper. So if you put in $5, I believe you got a 6-inch statue, and if you put in $10, you got a 12-inch statue, and they got enough money altogether. So they used the newspaper as their platform. Nowadays we have online, so you see a lot of online platforms. And that you could call it donations, because you were giving it just to feel good. So donations crowdfund. People have probably heard of GoFundMe. Can I just say, please don't use GoFundMe. We are so fortunate in Canada to have an organization called Fundraiser without an E, ZR. And it is an online platform. It's amazing. As I say, it's Canadian. But the other thing about it is you can get people to tip, and it actually offsets your costs. So that means that more money goes to your cause. So it's more of a transaction, and we're seeing that certainly in the fundraising donation side. People are looking for that transaction. I give you a bit of money, you tell me about where that money is going and how it's being used. So that donations. Rewards, so you could say the Statue of Liberty was a rewards, because you gave $5 and you got a reward back. So rewards is really cool. It's your Kickstarter, your Indiegogo, the ones that everybody's really heard of. And sometimes people get stuck on those sort of things. But for a small business, for a founder, I met with Delta Tree out in Inglewood. Met them at Founders Breakfast, went and had coffee with them this week to understand what they're doing. And they are an engineering company that develop MVPs for companies. So they'll do the electronics, they'll do whatever needs to be done, they'll make it happen. But they'll also do that initial run, whether it be 50, 100, 1,000. And sometimes people don't have the money to actually make that happen. So in that sort of case, that could be a great time for a rewards crowdfunding campaign, because you get the money in advance. You're almost pre-selling your item, and then you can take that and give that to the manufacturer, and you can walk your customers through the production process. You can get them really engaged, and you can manage their expectations. So if you know it's going to be till August before they get delivered, you always say September, under promise, over deliver, keep everyone very happy, but it means that there's any slippage. And it's a great way for organizations to get the money to actually make that product. It's really good for market research. You can put lots of different perks up there, and then you can decide, you can see what people actually want to buy, whether it be colors, different forms. I've done that before when looking at necklaces, wristwatches for a different medical device. And you also get a direct relationship with the person that who's backed your campaign. So you can do follow-up with them. You can ask them, how do they, what did you think of the product? What do they think of the service? Whatever. And they're almost like a focus group. It's a bit weird. Normally you have to pay people for focus groups. They're paying you to be the focus group, but that's like by the by. So that's your rewards. Then we have peer-to-peer lending. Didn't really have much of that in Canada, but GoParity, an organisation out of Portugal, has just moved here. They're all impact cases. They're now in Vancouver. Amazing company. For you as a backer, you put money in and you get your money back plus a percentage. As a company, it's often when it's difficult to get money from traditional sources. Peer-to-peer lending is great. So that's next one. Royalties. We always hear about that on Dragon's Den. Every time you get the sale, it's a bit of a benefit from a tax point of view, but actually we don't really have any royalty platforms here in Canada. And then the final one is equity crowdfunding. And that's one probably that I get involved with most. And that's when you're typically giving some sort of securities. So you could get, typically in Canada, it's common shares. In the US, it tends to be a bit more preferred, or even safes. But people are actually getting equity in your business. So yeah, those are the 5 different types.
Quite a few, right? So there are options available.
Yes.
And there are also options available how to fund your product, right? So your project or startup, you can fundraise from VC, from angels, you can go and apply for grants, you can bootstrap, you can borrow money. So where does crowdfunding fit best in that journey?
Yeah, so I'm going to quote Tyrrell, one of the Calgary stalwarts in this space, and he talks about it being a funding continuum. So it depends really where you are in your stage and also what your business needs are, what your additional needs are. I'm a huge advocate of bootstrapping. I love bootstrapping because it really focuses you in on what's the most important thing. And then when you do get money, you're really careful with where the money goes. Friends and family, but not everybody has that friends and family, but that's another route to take. When it came to Gusher, we bootstrapped and friends and family. We actually was all the team. We put our money in. That's how we did it. And then and these all overlap. That's really where I see crowdfunding next stepping in. So when we talk about equity crowdfunding in Canada, you can raise up to 1.5 million. Sweet spot 200,000 to $1 million is really where I like it. US is 5 million, although there's a campaign at the moment to get up to 20 million. And so you can see where it is. And actually people use crowdfunding platforms even with higher raises. So, I was talking with Dealmaker last week, the Canadian company doing a lot in the US. They've just done a number of raises at that 75 million raise. So, there's it. But let's just focus in on that 200,000 to 1 million. And what it's doing is it's validating your business. It's giving you a number of different backers. When we've done 3 raises with PKA, it's a pain-free needle. We've raised like 1.2 million. They've got 767 backers now, I think it is. The key thing about PKA is they can keep going back to their people. They've raised enough money to do something meaningful, and then so it's a sort of very gentle process from that point of view. Then they keep going back to their backers to get that next raise, and it's about 30-40% of people will go back in again and back the campaign the next time. So that's that really sweet spot. And we often do blended deals where we bring angels in as well. So we don't exclude angels by any stretch of the imagination. And we'll often bring agents in, especially with raising the higher amounts. And because if you use a platform, so people probably heard of Front Funder or Equivesto, our 2 main platforms here in Canada, they're exempt market dealers. And if somebody comes in and says they're an accredited investor, it goes through the accredited investor route. And if they say that, so if they're an angel, and if they are a normal human being, a retail investor, the other 97%, then they go through the crowdfunding exemption. So that's a way you can raise more than 1.5 million. So that's where, I see the sweet spot. But you've got to be, you've got to be investable. You've got to be able to tell a story. It doesn't have to be a B2C, doesn't have to be consumer. That pain-free needle is a B2B product. But we can tell the story that, if you've got a dog or a cat with diabetes, they don't understand why you're injecting them every day. If you're one of the 26% of the population who's scared of needles, the option to have a pain-free needle is a huge impact. So you can tell the story behind it. So, I'm always looking for, you've got a crowd or you can build a crowd. So you've either got to build a crowd, borrow a crowd, or buy a crowd. You've got a product that meets a need, and typically in a growing area, but you need that for investment anyway. That doesn't change. And I also like to see a team. And I also think that's important for any business. If you have a team, you ensure that there's, and I want a diverse team, and it's diverse thought, not necessarily diverse by any other standards, or it could be. But I want multiple people looking at the problem and working out all the issues and solving it, because if you have a team, you're more likely to deliver because you're going to identify issues beforehand, firstly, and secondly, you are going to be able to deliver because you have a team who can deliver behind it. So those are sort of things that I'm looking for. We've got a bit of an obsession about VCs here in Calgary. It's almost like, I've got a product, VC. I've got to say, it's almost like jumping straight there. And I do feel it is a bit of a jump. But when you're very small and you're not validated, you're not really able to have a fair negotiation with a VC. Whereas if you've done a crowd fund, you've shown that you can raise money, you can show there's validation, you're able then to take the conversation in a different way and actually have a fairer conversation between the two parties. And I think you're going to get a better valuation. And I think it's just healthier all the way around. But one thing I just wanted to say is, you're talking about startups. What we're seeing as a big trend in the US are community raises. So not just startups, but companies with revenue who are looking to grow. And I think it's now, if I remember rightly, I think it's over 40% of the raises now are from existing companies with revenue, not startups in the US. And I think that trend will come up here as well. So, that's when you're growth mode. And again, you're getting the validation. And if you need the rocket fuel of VCs, absolutely go for it. And I think one of the things that, we're definitely seeing is, that I'm going to give an example like Monzo, which is a UK bank. They raised £1 million in 56 seconds in the UK. That's pretty fast. But they got 1.5 billion from institutional funding after that. So, it's part of that continuum that Tyrell always talks about in the US. As say, 40% of equity crowdfund go on to raise institutional money. That was the SEC data from 2023. So, it's part of that continuum. I just think we should always consider it. It's not right for every company, but it should be part of the consideration.
I hear a lot that founders say that crowdfunding complicates the cap table. And also it gets really difficult to fundraise VC money later because VC look at it as retail money, not as smart money. So how do you address those concerns?
Well, sorry, I actually have a bit of a myth bust on that one because it was certainly communicated years ago and is completely not true. I mean, if you look at like the likes of Front Funder or Seed Invest in the US, I mean, they use the nominee or a trust structure, which basically means there is one line in the cap table. That is not messy by my books. And the other thing is that typically there's a voting trust agreement. So when you sign up, because if you're investing like $500, in Canada, retail investors can raise, put in 2,500 with advice up to 10,000. They're not investing huge amounts. You don't want to be chasing after them for any sort of major decision. They don't want you to be bothered. They want you to have the freedom to go and run your business. And it's actually one of the benefits one could say of crowdfunding is because people are less. You don't have to be bothered by them or bother them. And this voting trust agreement basically means they don't have the right to vote. I still invite them all to all the shareholder meetings, but they're not voting in those shareholder meetings. So it's a clean cap table. Then they're not bothering you. And then, the old smart money, dumb money. One of the things that I've definitely observed is sometimes accredited investors, they just go, I like the person, I like the team, and invest. And they don't actually do a very high level of due diligence. And sometimes I've been shocked by the amount of due diligence that retail investors do. They really know their stuff. So, it really depends on the investor. And I don't think there's necessarily smart money or dumb money. And sometimes people think, VCs or even angels, they've got their Rolodexes. I had a vegan bakery out of Ontario and they wanted to move into the US. So we wrote to all the shareholders going, does anybody have any contacts? 4 people came back, they're now in the US. So, they might not have that sort of depth of communication. I've had other companies where, they've gone through their investors and they've actually picked out board members because they've seen the companies that are there or the individuals that are there. And so that's, strengthened their board and they've got people who are engaged in their business. So, yeah, I don't know if I think that's a bit of a myth, which hopefully I've busted. I think my necklace is getting in the way. I'm just going to tuck it in. Okay, next question.
When you meet founders,
Yes.
how do you decide if their idea is a good fit for crowdfunding, and how do you set up reasonable or realistic funding goals?
Okay, so as I think I mentioned earlier, that it has to be investable, and that doesn't matter whether it's crowdfunding or anything. And I'm very honest with people. Like, I will tell people if it's a hobby. I will, what I'm looking for, and I think anybody who supports anybody raising capital, I want you to be obsessed by your problem, not your product. Because if you're obsessed by your product, then usually, nobody's product or service is perfect. You always need refinement. And so if you're obsessed by the problem, then you're actually going to keep refining, and you'll end up with the best product. So I'm going to look for that. As I mentioned before, team, those are the sort of things that I'm looking for. Can you tell a story? So we help founders write their stories so that we can engage with backers, so that we can identify who their target backers are and engage with them, and because people back what they believe in. So I want to be able to tell that story around it. So those are the things that I'm looking for when I meet with a founder. Just personally, I always like to see, are they coachable? And I think anybody who mentors or whatever, that's one of the things they're just looking for anyway. And then if we're looking at how much to raise, I want companies to raise what's the minimum amount you need to do something meaningful. So I give you an example. There was a vegan butchers. They butcher beans, and they wanted to raise 500,000, but they could do something meaningful with 100,000. So the target was set at 100,000. At the same time, I know there was another campaign going on the platform, and their target was 1 million, and they raised, I think they were sitting at 237,000, and everyone was like, "Oh, this campaign's failed." The vegan butchers was at 137. I was like, "Oh, it's so successful." Now the other one had raised 100,000 more, but everyone thought of it as being a failure because it was so far behind the goal. And there are these tricks and tips with crowdfunding. There's a bit of psychology behind everything. And in the case of the vegan butchers, they went on to raise 600,000 because everyone was going on about what a successful campaign was, because it had blown through their target. So, that's one of the things when we're setting it. But I always like to do, what's the minimum you need to do something meaningful, first off. And then you also don't want to over dilute your company. So you don't want to give away too many shares, because usually this is happening when you've got a lower share price. So we usually set a higher amount which you're comfortable at, because you need the founders to, especially at the early stages, and this is, that comes into the VC question again, but you need the founders to have enough skin in the game to keep getting up on the good days and keep getting up and going to work on the bad days.
You mentioned a couple of things,
Yes.
Storytelling, story, right? And also long-term backers. That's what I've heard.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions in that regard. So the first one, I also engaged with, had some experience before with Kickstarter. I had a few campaigns that I backed.
Yeah.
And you get really excited about the campaign, but then it doesn't last somehow, right? So what are I think for startups specifically, it's very important. How do you engage and keep engaged backers for the long term?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're really keen to do is to develop a backer persona. So who's like to actually back your campaign? And so we usually identify between 3 and 7 backer personas that we go after, and we find out where they live metaphorically. So what's their... That sounded a bit dodgy, but we try and find out sort of like what influences them, what magazines, what online content do they read, because that's where we're going to be speaking to them, what events they go to, so that we can actually reach out to them. And then we sort of raise awareness. We typically do a landing page and a drip campaign, so a sort of nurturing them. And what we're trying to do is we're getting them to know what's the problem you're solving? Why are you solving it better than anybody else? You know, what the competition is like out there, who the team is, because that is so important, the depth of the team and the passion behind the team. And then we also, in that sort of nurturing, we talk about, you know, how the company makes money or will make money, and how the backer will make money. And so, you know, that's you know, an equity crowdfund. When it's something like a Kickstarter, you know, it might just be how we solve the problem. We might have, you know, examples. We might actually show the product, even get feedback. We might use that time, you know, to that engaged group to get feedback on the product, on the campaign, on the video, etc. But we want to make sure that we keep communicating. In the case of a Kickstarter, and this is, you know, where I was saying about if the delivery is August, you say September. You know, you want to thank people for backing your campaign. You want to encourage them to share it. You want to encourage them to talk about it to other people. Then when the campaign closes, you want to thank them again for backing and believing in it. Then you literally want to walk them through each step, because this is something you don't normally get. If you sell something through your store, you don't get that relationship. And you want to say, you know, hey, we've just placed the order. Everyone gets excited, and that relationship is so important. You know, I always say to people on running campaigns, you know, especially the rewards campaign, if you don't deliver and if you don't communicate, you will never be able to run a campaign again. You know, it is all about trust. People will look up, and this has been going on for long enough now. People are really comfortable with it. You know, we're pretty fortunate when it comes to equity crowdfunding that we don't have, you know, much fraud. I mean, fraud tends to happen in the other spaces, but, you know, just keep talking. And as I said before, you can then go back to them, you know, with a new product. I bought, because I use a laptop, and so I have this device that pops out and gives me a little extra screen. So if I'm looking at sort of, you know, Excel data and trying to do some analysis and business planning, and I still get the updates when they're doing their new campaigns, this new super duper thing, and they know that I know the product and I can trust it. You can also go back to them for reviews, you know, Trustpilot, whatever you need to do, Google reviews. So yeah, that conversation is really, really important, and the storytelling throughout is really important. Yeah.
Storytelling is key for campaigns. Can you share one story that's really connected, or maybe a situation where the crowdfunding campaign was stuck and you helped to overcome that obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I've already covered part of that with the pain-free needle. You know, a B2B product, pain-free needle. But when you start relating it to people who have pets and they hate having to inject their cat every day with insulin, because the cat doesn't understand why. And so people can understand the impact. And I think that's one of the things is just being able to tell the why, the purpose. That's really important. Quite often we're doing videos, and I very much advocate doing videos, because the old-fashioned way of raising funds was two people walked into a room, you shook hands, and, you know, you shared a deck. You need to make that trust. You need so storytelling and actually having that personal contact is really important. And so with a video, I will often start it with the founder actually speaking to the camera and why this is important to them. And I do a straight look at the camera, and that's because it's building trust. So yeah, I mean, we try and you know, deliver the story. We always look at those individual backers. You know, I was saying the backer personas, and, you know, what are they looking for in an investment? You know, how do we want them to feel by investing? And so that helps us with that storytelling piece. But it is absolutely vital.
You've been in the space for almost a decade already. Time flies. How has crowdfunding changed since your first campaign, and what are the big trends you see for the future?
Well, I mean, like just the volume. I mean, I think the biggest year ever was 2021. I think everybody at home with COVID sort of was doing it. So I think in 2021 it was like 13.5 billion is what I'm thinking. It's projected to go by 2030 to about 43 billion. So, I mean, it's still growing. The UK has the most advanced crowdfunding regulations. US is certainly improving theirs. They're still not in the sort of the tax SES, SEIS and EIS that they have in the UK, but they're moving the right direction. We're limited. We have in Canada, and I've spoken to my MP about this on a number of occasions with my suggestions, but we really do need the regulations updated, and we need to also get it mainstream. It's mainstream in so many other countries, and it needs to be mainstream here. It just needs to be considered. Like, put it in, does it fit? If it fits, great. If you can get market research, if you can build a community, or if you have a community you can activate, use it. But so I can see huge growth in that space. Not as much as I would have liked in Canada. I think it was it's 100 million was done in 2023, the NCFA data. I think that sort of gives you an idea, how small we are in the grand scheme of things. Where do I see it going? The trends I see, I mean, things like AI. I mean, a lot of the platforms putting AI into their platforms now, and blockchain for the traceability. I think that's a big one. Secondary markets. So one of the things about this is illiquid stock. So if you back an equity crowdfunding campaign, you're looking for an exit to get your return. And I always try and manage expectations 5 to 8 years with a secondary market, and we have secondary markets in Europe. Where you can buy and sell shares. It gives that liquidity, which makes quite a difference. So I'm hoping, it looks like they're sorting that out in the US. It would be lovely to have that here in Canada too. Yeah, I think those are probably the key things. So people, I mean, it was often said as an individual, you should invest 10% of your money in private companies. But if you're not an accredited investor, you didn't have that opportunity, so now you do. So if you invest, say, 10% of your money in 10 to 15 companies, that would give you that diversity. So let's hope people do more of that, and see where it goes.
Fantastic. Victoria, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Thank you so much for your passion, and thank you so much for your hard work to promote crowdfunding in Calgary and beyond.
Thank you.
I look forward to see your next successful campaigns. I will be following them.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the drive. Let's get to my meeting.